Thank you. When I was first asked to do this, without hesitation, I said yes. SUNY Poly, as it's now known, back when I went to it, it was SUNY Utica, shaped my life. It was there where I learned leadership skills. I learned responsibility. I've I made friends that I still keep in touch with to this day, lifelong friends. It was an excellent experience. My first time out of the nest, so to speak. It was the first time being away from mom and dad for me, and it was a great experience. The classes were great, the teachers were great. It was I don't know what it's like now, and I want to talk a little bit about technology, and what we're doing here today is kind of different. We're all on Zoom. Some people are home. I'm in my office, it's interesting how technology has changed based on the pandemic, and I want to get into that in a little bit. But I want to talk about my time at SUNY Utica was a lot of fun. As I said, probably one of the most influential people in my life at the time was Kevin Edick. He was baseball coach, my baseball coach. For the 2 years I was there, he was a mentor. He was, an excellent coach. Always positive, always a positive person, which I think is extremely important, especially in this day and age. I think you have to be positive and not relish all the negativity, but look at what's positive in life, and he always did that. After I graduated from SUNY Utica, SUNY Poly, I went to Albany Law School. Graduated from Albany Law School, took the bar, passed it, and became a lawyer. And currently, I focus my practice on medical malpractice cases, personal injury cases, and trial work. By the way, am I echoing? Can everybody hear me okay? Is everything good? Okay, good. So, I've talked to a lot of college students through the pandemic, and law students. A lot of them come to resist this type of learning, virtual learning. What I tell people, what I tell you folks, learn it. Become an expert in it, because I think going forward, this is the way business will operate. I think, especially in the law, what I see is I just got out of a conference with a judge and was able to jump on here 10 minutes later. Pre-COVID, I wouldn't have been able to do that, because I would have had to go to court in Albany, come back to my office, and I just wouldn't have made it in time. I wouldn't have been able to do this. I think what courts are realizing, what businesses are realizing, is that it is a lot more economic to do business virtually if you can. I know a lot of it's tough because people work from home, but I think embrace this. I think this is going to be the future going forward. I think a lot of business is going to be conducted via Zoom, via Microsoft Teams. The New York State court systems, I can tell you that the New York State court systems, all they use is Microsoft Teams. And I've had to learn that. I've had to learn Microsoft Teams. I've had to learn Zoom. We're able to share, which I'm going to share a screen with you later on about a case that I did, and you'll be able to see that. Hopefully we did it. I think we're going to be able to do it. But what I tell people, especially college kids or recent college graduates, know the technology, because sometimes the people that you're going to be working for don't want to learn it. They really don't want to learn it. They're set in their ways, and they don't want to learn something new. So if you learn it, not only would you be an asset based on what that business is, but you'll be an asset because you can say, oh, I can show you how to do this Zoom meeting, or I can show you how to set up this Zoom meeting. I can show you how to share the screen. It's easy. So the more assets you have, the more sellable you'll be to a company when you're looking for a job. I took this from something from a post somewhere, and I want to read it to you because I think it's important with respect to innovation. Banks don't like Bitcoin. taxis don't like Uber, and hotels don't like Airbnb. And I say this because, and I thought it was very interesting because it's about innovation. That's innovation. We're talking about, taxis don't like Uber, but think about how if 10 years ago, if you would have said, you know what, I'm just going to push a button on my phone and a car will be here to take me to wherever I want to go, you'd be like, no, that's ridiculous. Somebody thought of that idea and put it to work. So Uber, I mean, it's a great idea. Airbnb, same thing. You can go and stay in someone's house, all using it online. I mean, it's crazy how technology has moved forward and adapted. So I think, what I would tell folks graduating college is or recent alumni, recent college graduates, learn that, embrace that technology because it's going to be used. All right, so what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the anatomy of a lawsuit because this is all I do. And I'm going to talk about specifically medical malpractice lawsuits. I hope I won't lose you. I hope I don't bore you. I tend to talk a lot, especially because in this profession, if anyone's thinking about going into law, there are different types, obviously, of lawyers. I'm a litigator. I'm in the trenches. I do depositions. I do trials. I butt heads with people. There are other types of law, that you can do real property. You can do, wills and estates and trusts. That wasn't for me. I like to be a litigator. I like to talk. So there are different types of laws, but I'm gonna talk to you about medical malpractice cases and what it is in New York State and kind of tell you what we have to prove in New York State in a medical malpractice lawsuit. So whenever I get a client, that comes in that has a medical malpractice case, they probably think that I'm Debbie Downer because I tell them all the problems with a medical malpractice case in New York State. And what I mean by that is they are very, very difficult. We have to, before we can even sue a doctor or before we can sue a hospital for medical malpractice, we have to have an opinion from an expert that says two things. Number one, there was a deviation in the standard of care, and number two, that deviation caused injury to the plaintiff. And those are just fancy words. Deviation from the standard of care means that the doctor screwed up. We have to prove, number one, the doctor screwed up. And we have to prove, number two, that screw up caused injury. That's a difficult thing to prove. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So when we talk about medical malpractice cases, and I tell this to all my clients that come in, I have a case right now that establishes a great, when I talk about deviation of the standard of care, what I thought the deviation was, or what I thought the doctor screwed up. And then when my expert told me what the screw up was, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is why we send it to experts. So I have a case where a woman has a kidney stone lodged in her ureter, and just briefly, the ureter is a tube that goes from the kidney to your bladder, and urine goes from the kidney to the bladder through the ureter. My client had a kidney stone stuck in her ureter, so obviously she was in a lot of pain. To fix it, what doctors do is they go in with a laser, blast it, so it crumples into little pieces, and so that way they can pass and it goes into the bladder and then it empties out. In this case, what happened was the doctor goes in, sees the kidney stone stuck in the ureter. He uses the laser, he blasts it. While he's blasting it, he accidentally perforates or puts a hole in the ureter. So he realizes he does this, and some of the pieces of the kidney stone go outside of the ureter into her abdominal cavity, and he's able to retrieve some of them, but some of them he has to leave in. So he realizes this happens, and he places what's called a stent in the ureter, and the stent is basically just a tube similar to the ureter, and it goes into the ureter and stays there until that hole is healed. Otherwise, if it doesn't heal and you take the stent out, urine's just going to escape out of that hole and go everywhere in the body. So when I sent this to the expert, my thought was, you know, that when he did that, when he used the laser to blast that kidney stone, and he caused that hole, that's the malpractice. He screwed up. He shouldn't have done that. He should have been a lot more careful with that laser. So I sent it to my expert, and I had a conversation. He, of course, all doctors are very, not, I shouldn't say arrogant, but they know a lot. They know a lot. So when I talked to him, he said, what do you think the malpractice is? And I told him what I thought it was. I thought it was when he used the laser and made a hole. And he says, you're wrong. He says, that is what's called, and we know this in the law, it's called a known risk and complication. So if something is a known risk and complication, you can't sue for it. It's a known risk, you sign a consent form, you can't sue for it. So this was a known risk and complication. I said, okay. He said, but what happened in this case was the doctor didn't leave the stent in long enough. So this woman goes and she has the surgery, she has the perforation, the hole in the ureter, the stent is placed. About 10 days later, the doctor removes the stent. And the next day, urine leaks out of it, and her whole abdominal cavity is full of urine, and she has sepsis. She has to have about 9 or 10 surgeries, and it's horrible. So that is a case where I thought the deviation was pretty simple, and it actually is simple. But it was something I didn't realize. Interestingly, when I did a deposition of the doctor, it's sometimes, you know, so depositions, just so everyone knows, I don't know what people know or what they don't know, but a deposition is basically where I sit down and I'll question the doctor who I've sued, or they'll be able to question my witness. So when I deposed the doctor, I asked him, I said, you know, how did you know that when you removed the stent 10 days later, when our expert says it should have been 6 weeks later, I said, when you removed that stent 10 days later, how did you know that hole had healed? And he said, I didn't. I said, well, why did you remove the stent then if you didn't know that it was healed? He said, well, I usually remove them in 10 days, so that's what I did in this case. So, okay. I mean, sometimes you get great testimony. I mean, that was unbelievable that he testified to that. You know, she had horrible problems after that. But that's a case where, you know, the deviation was what I thought was one problem, and it actually was a different issue. So the next step in a medical malpractice case is something called causation, what I talked a little bit about before. And you have to prove that the screw up of the doctor caused injury. And I'll give you an example of this. And this is why a lot of the times clients don't understand this. So I had a case where a guy has a chest x-ray in February of whatever year it was. I don't remember the year, but he has an chest x-ray in February. He's having coughing problems, and the x-ray shows what's called an opacity. An opacity is basically a nodule. And suspicious for lung cancer. I mean, if the guy was a smoker, and there's an opacity on the chest X-ray, and the X-ray technician, the radiologist says opacity shown, workup needed. So he needed to get it checked out. That's what the radiologist says. That report is then sent to my client's primary care physician. Primary care physician, for whatever reason, ignores it. Doesn't tell the client that he has a nodule in his chest, and just sticks it in his chart. 4 months later, he goes in to have some kind of surgery. They do routine chest X-ray for cardiac clearance for the surgery, and the doctor looks at the chest X-ray and says, "Oh, that nodule has gotten bigger since February." And my client says, "What are you talking about? What nodule?" And he says, "You didn't know you had a nodule?" And he says, "No." Obviously, the doctor screwed up in that case. Obviously, the doctor should have told my client that there was an opacity, that there was possible lung cancer. Come to find out, it was lung cancer. He had to go through chemotherapy, radiation. The problem in the case, though, was what's called causation. And what our experts said was there really wasn't a big difference in treatment from February when they should have told him about it until 4 months later when they actually found it and told him about it. It didn't grow enough to change the treatment. So that was the problem we had. So as you can probably see, these medical malpractice cases are difficult to say the least. Because even when you have a slam dunk liability case like that, I mean, clearly the doctor screwed up, and the doctor should have told him that there was a nodule in his lung that could be cancer. He needs to get it checked out. This client had no clue, and clearly the doctor screwed up. But if it doesn't cause injury, then you don't have a case. So I tell everybody that right up front. One thing I also do is I like to, even though no one's an attorney here, I do like to share this story because it's an interesting one. Well, it's not really a story. It's what I do when I prep a client for a deposition. So one of the most important things I do, I think, in my line of work is prepping somebody for a deposition, my client. They usually tell me, wow, you were way worse than the defense attorney was, because I like that. I take that as a compliment because I want to prepare them for what the questions that they're going to be asked, and the tough questions. I don't hide from them. Those are the questions that are going to be asked. And I always tell them this story about a movie that I absolutely love, which maybe some of you have seen it, maybe you haven't. It's an old movie. It's called My Cousin Vinny. It's a great, great movie. If you're going to be a trial lawyer, watch that movie because it's phenomenal. There's so many good cross-examination. When I was in law school, my trial tactics teacher showed us clips of that movie when he was cross-examining witnesses. So yeah, somebody says, love that movie. It's a great movie. So for those of you that don't know about the movie, it's a movie about two kids accused of killing a clerk. They didn't do it. And it's all about this attorney, Vinny, who tries to get him off. And it's funny, but one of the things I tell them in a deposition, you're being taken down word for word. Whatever you say is going to be taken down black and white in the transcript. Whatever you say is going to be set forth. So in that movie, there's a scene where one of the guys is being questioned by a police officer, and there's a stenographer there, and the stenographer's taking everything down word for word. And the sheriff says, "You shot the clerk." And he says, "I shot the clerk? I shot the clerk?" Like that. Fast forward to trial, and they read the transcript of the hearing, and it says, question, "You shot the clerk?" Answer, "I shot the clerk." So you see how when you're especially in a deposition, it looks like he admitted to shooting the clerk, when in fact he didn't. That's why I always give that example to my clients, to tell them, don't try to be funny. This isn't a joke. Everything's being taken down verbatim. So I use that as an example every time. So generally what happens in a lawsuit, once we sue the case out, if we get an expert opinion, we then have paper discovery, which is like the boring stuff where you have to write down all the stuff that they did wrong. We have to give them all the medical records, and they give us all their documents, and that bogs down the cases. Once that's done, we do depositions, which are what I just talked about, where I can ask the doctors questions, they can ask my client questions. Once that's done, we get a trial date, and we have a trial. Right now in COVID era, we're looking at years before we get trial dates, which is awful for plaintiffs, but that's what's happening. Usually I tell people usually pre-COVID, I would tell people 3 years from the time we get a case in, especially med-mal, until the time it gets resolved. 3 years usually passes because there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in a medical malpractice case. So that's kind of, I know I do have a few more minutes. I do want to do one thing. It may take a little bit of time, but I do want to answer questions that you have. But I think this is a case where this is the case that Andrea had mentioned, where I got the verdict on, which was an interesting case. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you parts of my opening statement and then play something for you. Hopefully I'll be able to share the screen. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. But it's a very interesting case. So this is what the case is about. So Dr. K at Hospital C treats my client. She's complaining of a migraine headache. She has had a headache since the day before, and she describes it as being everywhere in her head. Despite the fact that she's being administered pain medication, she's anxious, she's loud, she's noted to be speaking inappropriately, moaning, holding her head, thrashing about in the bed, complaining of severe head pain. The doctor does some problems or some scans. He finds nothing wrong, discharges her home with a migraine headache. The next day, she returns to the hospital. Same complaints, but this time she has a little bit more. She's having some neurological problems, meaning at one point she's alert to self and place, but not to time. So there's three things that they look at: self, place, and time. She didn't know the time frame. So that's something you want to look at. She complains of impaired vision as well. She's moaning, she's screaming out. She actually, when she gets to the hospital, she's unable to sign certain consent forms, and a family member is required to do so. She complains of a migraine with nausea, photophobia, and reports her pain is 10 out of 10. Examination is conducted, and the ER physician, same physician as the day before, ER physician says, look, you need to see a neurologist. And he gets her appointment a few days later for a neurologist, and she makes one. So that day when she's supposed to go to the neurologist, she wakes up and horrible pain. She states she's had a migraine for the last 7 days, complains of dizziness, nausea, blurry vision, photosensitivity. She's screaming out help, calling out for her mother. She's breathing rapidly. She's hyperventilating. So instead of going to the neurologist, she goes right to the ER again. The doctor in this, there's a new doctor there in the ER at Hospital C, and the new doctor is in charge of managing the entire emergency department. He reports that she has a migraine, she's dizzy, she's nauseous, blurred vision, photosensitivity, and sharp pain all over her head. One of the things you have to look for in this situation is a stroke. He doesn't say that, but it's known in the medical community. You got to rule out stroke somehow. Instead of treating her, this doctor notes that she's been in the emergency department twice in the past week for migraines, and she missed a neurology appointment, and she's been getting narcotic pain medications. That was his focus. Her blood pressure is elevated significantly, and her pain level again is 10 out of 10. She wants something done. She's having something going on with her. She wants something done. The doctor diagnoses her with a migraine and discharges her, doesn't do any testing. He discharges her saying that she follow-up to be arranged by patient with neurologist in 1 to 2 days. And she's discharged home with a family member. According to the chart, she's released at 11:09 a.m. Less than an hour after being discharged, she calls for an ambulance once again. The rescue squad finds her jumping and screaming inside of her sister's apartment, yelling that she wants to go to Hospital H, a different hospital, because Hospital C will not do anything for her. This information is reported to the doctor who just saw her. His name's Dr. She reports 50 out of a 10 headache, and while being transported to the new hospital, Hospital H, she becomes dizzy and nauseous. She notes her head is killing her. Doctor from Hospital C calls Hospital H while this patient is being taken there to give them a, quote, heads up. And he tells them that this patient is, quote, histrionic, and he's concerned for, quote, drug-seeking behavior. The transcript of the telephone call, which is what I'm going to try to share with you, portions of it, because the whole thing's kind of boring, but I'm going to share you the relevant portions of it. And you'll hear what he tells her. He accuses her of getting it off the street. He says this to the doctors at the new hospital. He makes all these crazy accusations against her. He says, do I have to worry about withdrawal? You know, is she getting it from the street? He's basically saying she's faking everything and she wants to have drugs. Interestingly, this doctor had only been working at Hospital C for 2 months and had only seen this patient on one occasion. And he makes all these allegations that she's always in the hospital, in and out for pain medication, narcotics. We got her hospital records for the 10 years prior. She had been in 2 times and she'd gotten narcotics twice. So he says all this to the new hospital. The new hospital actually does what's called a MRI, MRA, and an MRV, look at the arteries and the veins in the brain. They immediately find that she had sustained bilateral cerebellar strokes. So bilateral means both sides, cerebellar strokes in her brain. So at the time that she was going through all of this, she was suffering from strokes. And this doctor thought it was, she was drug seeking. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to try to share my screen right now and play you parts of this telephone call. This is the phone call from the doctor to the new hospital about this patient. So that was the phone call that kind of won the case. That was the smoking gun, I think, for lack of a better word. And you know, if you look at that, what I did with it was I only showed that to the jury one time because I have a theory that people get desensitized to things the more they see it. The more I saw this tape, and the more I thought, well, it's not that bad. I didn't want the jury to think that. So I showed that to them once, and then quoted during my closing, quoted during my opening, and that was it. You know, he talks about how he's, you know, how he believes he's not passing judgment. He tries to believe all of his patients and blah. He doesn't believe her about anything. And that was my theory of the case. He didn't believe her when she said she had a headache, let alone she was stroking out at the time. So, you know, that call right there put him in a lot of hot water. But I guess that's, you know, I've gone a little bit over, it looks like. So if anyone has any questions, I certainly am more than happy to answer.